Okay, guys, so welcome everyone to the Irish American Heritage Museum, and we're delighted to have with us Dr. Ciarán Riley and Danny Levy. So anyway, we're here tonight to talk about a famous, almost kind of lost philanthropist and Irish immigrant, Cornelius Heaney, who was from actually the same town. Both Ciarán and Danny is not far from it in County Offaly. So there was, I suppose, always hints at home about this man and the influence that he had in New York. So we'll talk about him being his name is Cornelius Heaney, an influential and philanthropic man, but also then his involvement with the first Catholic church in New York, the state of New York, not to mind the city, St. Peter's, which of course is very near and dear to Irish America because it was the place where the body of Father Michael Judge was brought after 9/11. He was officially recognised as victim 0001. I'm going to minimise myself now and mute myself, and then I'll give it over to the two of you. Thank you very much.
As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm from the town of Edenderry in County Offaly, and the story of Cornelius Heaney is one which is quite close to me. Cornelius Heaney worked in the town of Edenderry in a place called Fullard's Brewery. Now, Fullard's Brewery in the 18th century was one of the largest employers in the town of Edenderry and in that part of County Offaly. Today, there is no mark or no memory of it in the locality, only a keystone which bears the initial RF and the date 1786. Now, 1786 is a crucial date to remember. It's just 2 years after Heeney departed for America. As I said, I was born, and just put it there on the map for you, less than a minute's walk from Fullard's Brewery, 300 metres from Fullard's Brewery. Growing up, Fullard's Brewery was often mentioned, but we knew very little about it or about the people that worked there. All of that changed in the mid-1990s when, and to quote the people at the time, a group of strange Americans came to Edenderry in the summer of 1996, led by Father Gabriel Rail, and that there was plans to have this man, Cornelius Heaney, beatified. They had come to trace his roots, and much of the debate while they were here, and indeed for some time after, centred on where Cornelius Heaney was actually from. Then I put together a small project in Edenderry and gave a lecture as part of the Gathering 2013 celebrations, looking at the careers and the lives of Edenderry immigrants and those from the surrounding areas who had went to various parts of the world, made new lives, and had left a mark in some shape or form. What was remarkable in that space of time between 1996 and 2013 was that we couldn't add anything significantly to the story of Cornelius Heaney, only for the bare facts which had been known. His philanthropic efforts, his life in America, surrounding politics and the accumulation of property and vast wealth, and then its dispersal amongst the poor of Brooklyn and further afield. We couldn't get any further along the line in this story. Fast forward again to, I suppose, just over 18 months ago when myself and Danny made contact for the first time. Now, as Elizabeth mentioned, Danny is from the village of Rode. I'm from the town of Edenderry, about 5 or 6 miles in between us. Danny had actually left for America when I was still in primary school, so there was a bit of a gap between us. But over the past 18 months or so, we've been working quite closely together on this project in trying to find Cornelius Heaney. Part of the problem that I had encountered over the last 7 or 8 years in trying to move this story on was that there were no papers. There was so little known about Cornelius Heaney. The problem now is we have too many papers. The discovery of a vast archive of over 5,000 documents has allowed us to explore the life of Cornelius Heaney. One of the things that it allowed us to do quite quickly is to correct some of the misinformation surrounding Cornelius Heaney and his lifetime, and that I have repeated some of these mistakes in the past, but thankfully the archive is now revealing an awful lot about firstly his early life, and secondly his connections throughout 19th century New York. We could throw out a list of 100 names, and Cornelius Heaney was connected in some way or another, or his life crossed paths with these individuals in 19th century. The great irony of all of this, of course, is that Cornelius Heaney was a man that didn't want to be remembered. You know, he didn't actually want these to be publicized. This is, I think, one of the great ironies that, you know, we're finding out more and more about him. Most of the information that was written down about Cornelius Heaney was written down in the first 2 decades after his death in 1848. A remarkable effort on the part of the Brooklyn Benevolent Society to try and get to the bottom of who Cornelius Heaney was. They sent representatives from America to Ireland and toured the Midlands, from Tullamore across to Edenderry and into parts of Kildare, County Meath as well. Interview people who knew Cornelius Heaney, who could give information about him. This whole emigration network that Cornelius Heaney was responsible for as well, and facilitated and was a part of, which I think when the book is published and when all of this is presented, will show the networks which were in place prior to the Great Famine and before the Great Exodus from Ireland to America. And people like Cornelius Heaney were actively engaged in bringing their former townspeople to America, setting them up, and ensuring then, and in turn, more and more people came from Ireland to New York. So that's an important aspect of what the papers are turning up. So who was Cornelius Heaney? I've spoken a lot about him already. He was born in 1754. Where was he born? Well, the bulk of the evidence probably suggests that he was from Leader, that he was actually from nearby County Kildare. Heaney is there, we know, definitely by the age of 10 or 12 in the town of Edenderry, and he works there until 1784. Now, there's a lot of accounts of his travels to America and that he was shipwrecked in the Delaware River and that Quakers came to his rescue. He was always well disposed to the Quakers. His shipwreck incident and his arrival in America, allegedly penniless, he went to work in Philadelphia with George Meade. Now, most accounts suggest that he only spent about 2 or 3 months there, but Danny has uncovered that he actually spent 2 years there, or at least was in receipt of wages for a period of 2 years from George Meade, which places his arrival with Mr. William Backhouse roughly around 1786, early 1787 in New York. He worked there alongside another young man who had arrived as an immigrant, John Jacob Astor. And the two worked together for a period of time before they parted ways. And Heaney was employed, or went into employment on his own, and quickly amassed a fortune, quickly accumulated vast stretches of property in Brooklyn. Apart from acquiring property, he was also divesting that wealth in charitable sources. He also played a pivotal role in the early Irish or the early Catholic venture into politics. He was the second Catholic elected to the New York State Assembly after Francis Cooper, and served 5 terms there between 1818 and 1822. From an early period, he's involved in churches, the construction of churches, the maintenance of churches, the enlargement of churches, and in general, the promotion of the Catholic religion. He's also involved in the construction of the first orphan asylum in New York and in Brooklyn. In 1835, of course, a great fire rips through the city, and Heaney's property is actually destroyed. His shop is destroyed, and after that period, he retires to Brooklyn. But he continues to be very much at the heart of Irish Catholic America. He sees what is happening in Ireland, and he sees what is coming. Indeed, one of the initial ideas or reasons for forming the Brooklyn Benevolent Society, as Danny will mention in a few minutes. He's also prominent in Irish America amongst the community of people that arrived after the 1798. Heaney's life is very much intertwined with these people and in the politics that they bring with them to Irish America. He's prominent in the association which is known as the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. And one of the areas which hasn't, I suppose, transpired yet in the archive is the movement of people from County Offaly, from Heeney's immediate world, to work on the Erie Canal in the 1820s and the 1830s. And that's something that I'm keen to explore, because I know these people do move, but we have no connecting factor between that small pocket of County Offaly and the Erie Canal. So it'd be interesting to see, is Heeney the man that's actually responsible for that? Heeney establishes, with a number of other people, the Brooklyn Benevolent Society, effectively to manage the property that is in his estate and the wealth that he has accumulated, to spend it, to distribute it, and I hope I'm using those words rightly, amongst the poor of Brooklyn and New York, and for charitable purposes, and to see that this would continue. And I think it's remarkable that the society does continue today, and what Cornelius Heaney started. Cornelius Heaney died on the 8th of May, 1848. His funeral was a huge occasion in Brooklyn. His afterlife, I suppose, was mired slightly by these legal cases in the 1850s and the 1860s, but they were eventually won, and the Brooklyn Benevolent Society continued to do its business. After that, Heeney kind of slipped into oblivion, and apart from attempts by the Society to publicise Heeney in 1948 on the occasion of his 100th anniversary of his death, and the publication, a dissertation which was undertaken at around the same period, 1948, 1949. And so his memory has kind of slipped into oblivion. There are 3 plaques or memorials to Cornelius Heaney in Brooklyn. There are none in Edenderry. That's something that we'd like to rectify, getting his name out there, and kind of finding Cornelius Heaney has begun again. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Danny and let him take you up on the next part of the project.
Really, this part of the talk is about St. Peter's Church, and it's about the bell in St. Peter's Church, touching on not just Heaney's involvement, but many important people who were involved in St. Peter's from the early days especially. Brooklyn Society meeting, the Reverend John Hughes presided over that meeting on August 6, 1845. At that meeting, the Mayor of Brooklyn, Thomas Talmadge, spoke of the generous donor Cornelius Heaney, whose name shall be held in remembrance by a grateful people. From the original minute book of that meeting, we see the entry that Heaney stated his desire was to have his Catholic countrymen and their children kept from want. Many of them arrived here without a coat and with nothing to eat, and he wished them, and more especially their children, provided for. It was in the Brooklyn Society archives that we discovered the information on the bell in St. Peter's. In the archives contained a dissertation that was written back in 1859 by Sister Bernard and Mary. The dissertation was on Heeney and the Brooklyn Society, and it referenced the bell information. It states, beneath the roof of St. Peter's Church on Barton Street, New York City, there remains yet one of the final relics of the old church, the church which once housed Mother Elizabeth Ann Seton as a devout worshipper, the church from which 1785 on became the Mecca of Catholics in the city of New York. Though now silenced for many years, the old bell, which in days past called the parishioners to Mass, bears the following inscription: the Reverend William O'Brien, the Reverend Matthew O'Brien, pastors of St. Peter's Church, New York. Thomas Stockton, John Sullivan, Cornelius Heaney, Michael Roth, Francis Cooper, John Byrne, and Andrew Morris were the trustees. The foundry was a French foundry. The bell came from France, and the name of it was Cossey Foundry. How many passed beneath that roof totally unaware of the overhanging bell, even more unaware of the life and deeds of the man whose name is listed there in 5th place, Cornelius Heaney. St. Peter's Church was built in 1785, known as the Mother Church. It was the first Catholic church built in New York City. I think it's worth noting that St. Peter's Church was built on land leased from the nearby Trinity Church. Without the help of the Protestant faith in the early years, it would not have been possible. St. Peter failed to pay the rent on that land more than once, and eventually, thankfully, Trinity Church decided to sell the land to St. Peter's and wipe away any debts that they owed at the time. Following a partial roof collapse of the original wood structure, the church was rebuilt on the original site in the Greek Revival style. Somewhat unusual look, some might think, but there are a number of Catholic churches with this type of style in New York City. At this point, we decided to look for more information on the bell and try to confirm its existence and whether it survived and was still inside the roof of St. Peter's, keeping in mind the dissertation had been written 60 years ago. I sent an email to the parish office with the inquiry and a summary of the research on Heeney, and I sent a screenshot of the dissertation with the bell information. A few days later, I received a reply confirming the bell was indeed inside the roof, and attached to the reply were some pictures. Although the pictures that were sent were only at the front of the bell, the church did not have any pictures at the back of the bell and could not confirm whether the names mentioned were on it or not. The next step was to try to get access to the roof, if possible, to see the bell and check for the names. So I scheduled to go down and meet with Philomena Pinto, the office manager, and Will Alvarado, the longtime caretaker of the church. The goal was to ask for access to the bell if possible, but I wasn't sure that would be possible. So in May of 2021, Philomena and Will were kind enough to give me a tour of the church, including a glance through the original baptism books. It truly is a fascinating building packed with history. Some Catholic New Yorkers of note who were connected to St. Peter's. Charles O'Connor was an American lawyer who was notable for his career as a trial advocate and candidacy in the 1872 presidential election. He was the first Catholic presidential nominee. O'Connor was educated in the city and began to study law at the age of 16. During his illustrious career, he would become great friends with Cornelius Heaney. In the 1850s, while describing Heeney, O'Connor stated, "I remember him well from 1812. He was an alderman, kind, charitable, and generous in a high degree. He was always giving to the poor and helping needy friends with endorsements. He was a father bountiful. Mr. Heaney was Irish, had risen from humble circumstances, was destitute of pride or pretensions of any kind, sociable, and indeed without fault of any sort. For the last 25 years of his life, I knew him well. I was intimate with him as I could be with anyone whose life walk and conversation were so different than my own. We belonged in our church factions together. I was his counsel on some occasions. I would take Cornelius Heaney to have been an unmixed Celt, one of the ancient Irish stock." O'Connor retired in 1881 and settled in Nantucket, Massachusetts. He died there in 1884 and he was buried in one of the vaults, ironically under Old St. Patrick's Cathedral, the Sisters of Charity in St. Peter's Church. It's especially significant that the first sisters who taught at St. Peter's Preschool were Sisters of Charity. In 1805, their foundress, Elizabeth Ann Seating, had been received into the Catholic Church at St. Peter's. This young Episcopalian widow, who liked to meditate on Vallejo's painting in the crucified Christ over the main altar, was to become St. Peter's most famous convert and the first native citizen of the United States who was elevated to sainthood. Another parishioner of St. Peter's, known for his sanctity and charity, was the Venerable Pierre Toussaint. Although a contemporary of Elizabeth Seton, Pierre began his life in very different circumstances, as a slave in Haiti. His cause for sainthood is currently being reviewed in Rome. Father Felix Varela, he was the exiled Cuban patriot and philosopher, served on the staff of St. Peter's, ministering to immigrants of all nationalities. And to help him with the influx of Irish-speaking immigrants during the famine years, he learned to speak Gaelic. Father William Quarter, who was born in Killearn, County Offaly, to Michael and Anne Quarter. He had three brothers, James, Walter, and Patrick, but the latter died before his ordination. He studied the classics in private academies in Tullamore from 1814 to 1822. While preparing to enter Maynooth College, Quarter was visited by a priest who had served as a missionary in the United States. He completed his studies in 1829 and then went to New York, where he was ordained by Bishop John Dubois on September 9th of that year. Porter then served as the curate of St. Peter's Church, and he administered to the sick and dying during the cholera epidemic of 1832. He placed the children who had been orphaned by the epidemic under the care of the Sisters of Charity. In 1833, he was named pastor of St. Mary's Church on Grant Street on the Lower East Side, where he founded a parochial school. On November 28th, Porter was appointed the first bishop of the newly erected Diocese of Chicago. One of the most beloved pastors of St. Peter's in the early years was the Reverend John Power. Father Power was born in Rosscarbery, County Cork in 1792. He was educated and ordained in Maynooth. He arrived in New York in 1819, one of the first priests from that great institution to come to America. During the period before Brooklyn had its first Catholic church, Father Power was known to row a boat across the East River and preach in private houses and elsewhere. In 1826, he built a new orphan asylum under the care of the Sisters of Charity on land donated by Cornelius Heaney, adjacent to the old St. Patrick's Cathedral. Also in 1826, he dedicated a church in the city, St. Mary's. Father Power also presided over the construction of the present St. Peter's Church when it was rebuilt in 1836. Another Irishman, Father Matthew O'Brien, whose name appears on the bell, was well known for his sermons. After the Catholics of Albany laid the cornerstone of their first church, St. Mary's, on September 13, 1797, which was the second Catholic church in New York State after St. Peter's, Father O'Brien was appointed. He did not remain in Albany long, and in 1800 he was appointed at St. Peter's. At this time, the city had no public school system. Education was either a matter of private interest or was left to the initiative of religious congregations. Father William O'Brien is also named on the bell, and he is believed to be a brother of Father Matthew O'Brien. In a letter, Father O'Brien stated, "The congregation of St. Peter's had vastly increased, and even now would fill 2 churches. We will finish the steeple in late spring. I purchased a bell. Our churchyard is nearly paid for. We will put up a railing to the steps of the church and open another door. Could we erect a chapel of ease on the extremity of this city where most of the poor Catholics are thronged, it would make us happy." His wish for a second church would come true some 8 years later when the cornerstone of old St. Patrick's Cathedral was laid, although it would take another 6 or 7 years before it was completed. John McCluskey, Kieran mentioned him earlier in the talk. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, to Patrick and Elizabeth McCluskey, who had emigrated. Following his father's death in 1820, he became the ward of then family friend Cornelius Heaney. He thus became the first native New Yorker to enter the priesthood. McCluskey was named the first bishop of the newly erected Diocese of Albany by Pope Pius IX on May 21st, 1847. McCluskey first selected St. Mary's Church as his episcopal see, but it soon proved unsuitable, leading him to construct the cathedral in the Immaculate Conception. While many devout Catholics would pass through St. Peter's and go on to do remarkable things in the name of their faith, there was another more infamous young man who would choose a different path. This picture from the original baptism book shows on September 28, 1859, a young boy named Patrick Henry McCarthy was baptized at St. Peter's. While he went with the name Henry McCarthy, fate would have it that he would forever become known as Billy the Kid. As luck would have it, at the end of my visit to St. Peter's, I explained the story of the bell and the link to Heeney, and he very kindly gave me access to the roof, guided by Will Alvarado, the caretaker. We went up to the roof and over to the area of the bell, which is towards the front of the church. The bell is positioned at the bottom of the original steeple, which is now covered by a skylight and an air vent. Although it's above head height from where you're standing on the walkway, you can clearly see the front of the bell. It was then I realized why there are no pictures of the back of the bell. To get access to the back, it requires climbing into the area and a tight maneuver around the bell to try to get a view. But eventually I made it in, and it was a tight squeeze, I can tell you. I made it in and reached the iPhone around to take pictures of the back of the bell, and sure enough, the names are on it. These pictures are believed to be the first known pictures of the back of the bell with the names. The bell represents Catholics went through to establish their congregation and practice their faith. While St. Peter's is certainly considered a historic church, sadly some of its more recent history is clouded with tragedy. Out of the rubble of New York's Twin Towers on that fateful 9/11 morning emerged a symbol of hope, a perfectly proportioned cross formed from the steel girders of the previously standing Twin Towers. The original 9/11 cross was found in the wreckage of the Twin Towers, and subsequently it was mounted adjacent to St. Peter's on October 15, 2006, where it stayed until it was moved on July 23, 2011 to the September 11 Memorial Museum the former World Trade Center site. A hollow spot in the cross holds the remains of the original Twin Tower wreckage. The artist selected by Cardinal Egan to craft the new cross was sculptor John Krazitz, who was raised in New Jersey. The cross was built hollow, and on his way to New York from California, John Krazitz encouraged people to put notes and symbols of loss inside. That hole was sealed up with a piece of fallen World Trade Center. When it rains, rust from the piece of metal will drip down the rest of the cross, simulating a bleeding heart. The base of the cross includes a metal book with 35 pages listing the names of all 9/11 Twin Tower victims. This cross stands as a tribute for all of us walking the streets today. This cross reflects who we are and who we choose to become. Father Michael Judge, the beloved chaplain of New York Fire Department, was early to the scene of the disaster, giving absolution and prayers for the wounded and dying. Late that morning, he was in the North Tower lobby, surrounded by rescue workers, when the South Tower collapsed. The force of the building falling on itself blew cement dust of the compromised North Tower building as it was falling. Obscured by the cloud of dust, it was only after the incident that the men nearby saw the Father Judge had been struck down and killed. Father Kevin Smith, another fire chaplain from Patchogue, New York, blessed the body on the street. Eventually, 2 firefighters, an FBI medical technician, a police lieutenant, and a bystander carried his body into St. Peter's and laid him down in front of the altar. St. Peter's and the event of 9/11 are forever linked, and the photograph of Father Michael Judge being carried out of the rubble is an everlasting image of that day. During the mayhem, it was soon discovered the undercarriage from one of the planes had pierced the roof of St. Peter's, causing some damage. That repaired area is still visible on the roof today. St. Peter's Church and its bell represented freedom and resilience in the early 1800s, and the Freedom Tower of today is yet another symbol of freedom and resilience. 94 years after St. Peter's was built, St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue opened its doors. While St. Peter's was the seed, the cathedral affirmed the ascendance of religious freedom and tolerance. Both these buildings represent 2 vastly contrasting times in the Catholic history of New York and indeed America. They are also linked in another unique way. Cornelius Heaney and his good friend Andrew Morris are both named on the St. Peter's bell. Morris was the first Catholic office holder in New York City. In the 1820s, Andrew Morris and Cornelius Heaney both together owned the land that St. Patrick's Cathedral is built on. Another name on the bell is Francis Cooper. He was the first Catholic elected to New York State, as Kieran had mentioned earlier. Cornelius Heaney became only the second Catholic elected to the State Assembly. With the bell removal plan in mind, I worked up the courage to speak to Father Quinn, and thankfully he supported it. Recently, the church have decided on the location for the bell in front of the church. The landmark and Department of Building application process is underway, along with fundraising. With the assistance of West New York Contracting and its owner, Alfred Galecchio, we hope to have the bell removed soon and on display out front for all to see. And finally, if you get a chance to visit New York, don't forget to call by St. Peter's, Berkeley Street. And soon, hopefully, you will see the bell and make sure to read the names. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I want to say thank you to the Irish American Heritage Museum for hosting this talk today.
Aside from just the history of New York City and the Catholics, you said, Danny, there, a very telling sentence, like the story had changed so much in the almost 100 years, from this kind of small plot down on Berkeley Street to the monstrosity like on Fifth Avenue. And of course, I remember reading that, when he bought the land, when Dagger John, as he was known, Archbishop Hughes got the land, it was opposite Madame Restel. She was a famous abortion provider in New York. And so even though it was way up in the sticks of Fifth Avenue, they were still trying to kind of shame him by having him look at her every day when he opened the door. But so, Kieran, we had a question from Anne that wanted to know how did Cornelius make his money? You mentioned, I thought it was fascinating when I heard Backhouse straight away. I thought, oh God, he knew the Astors. So what was he working at in America?
he would have made use of the trade networks that he knew from Philadelphia. Danny would know more about the ins and outs of the work that he done there for George Meade.
Yeah, he was hired to work at bookkeeping, in fact, in Meade's office. And it was George Meade that actually apparently encouraged him to move to New York at the time after spending 2 years there. And he ended up working for Backhouse. He left the business to both men. They actually took over his business and his contacts and were a partnership for 3 or 4 years. He ended up having a falling out and went their separate ways, but continuing on the fur business. And then Astor, of course, broke into development and real estate. And
it is interesting that a man of that stature, you know, and wealth was lost, because, and I suppose we can maybe pin that a little bit on his Catholicism, because a lot of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick and all those boys, you know, early Irish bankers and people that were involved in politics were Protestant, you know, so McNevin's statue thing there is down in Trinity Church and stuff.
I don't think he wanted to be known either. His lifelong friend, John Gottsberger, said, you know, years later that he knew Heeney was donating to churches. He was his best friend for 50 years, but he never told him how much and to where it was. You know, he just did his thing. And that was the question that Kieran and I had with the Brooklyn Society, you know.
And Kieran, in one of your slides, it just said, I think that he joined his father and mother. He followed his grandfather, but he, you know, joined his friend. Had the whole family left Offaly?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're trying to piece together is the movement of all of these individuals and when they did move, and there's some discrepancy with dates about when they moved.
And of course, names are probably used and reused, so it's hard to know. Is it your
they're reused you know, the Fullard family are mentioned as well. So it's narrowing down all these things and actually, you know, getting the proper chronology of events is the tricky bit. But thankfully, the papers are allowing us to do that now.
And do you think, Kieran, I think you said the Quakers owned a good bit of the town at home. They are kind of known for their philanthropy too. You know, like, do you think that had an influence on him, that this noblesse oblige kind of an attitude, you know, that you have to provide for the ones?
I think so, and I think definitely the work ethic. You know, this. I think
accumulating money for its sake, like.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there was a lot of substantial Quaker businesses in the town of Edenderry at the time, and it's funny, he leaves in 1784, and the town of Edenderry is in serious decline of 1783, 1784. So he's leaving at a time where there is serious decline owing to the decline of woolen manufacture was the big thing at the time, and that would have had a knock-on effect then for the brewery, and everything was a knock-on effect. But like, you had families like the Arnott's, the Pims, in Edenderry, you know, where they go elsewhere and they do other things. So I definitely think he would have been influenced by these people, because the Quakers were remarkable business people as well as everything else.
Yeah. And I mean, that's it. Like, you think of Rowantree and all that, you know, over in England with the factory system, but also like the kind of welfare umbrella that they had. And then, of course, we know what the Quakers did in Ireland during the Great Hunger too. So there is that. You know, they were, as you say, hard workers, but good at business too, and organised, and, you know, so it's an interesting way of looking at it. And said it was the American Irish Historic Society and that had their archives. And I'd say they probably didn't know exactly what was in there, but they did have some kind of certainly they knew they had the Brooklyn Benevolent Archives. Am I right, lads?
Yeah.
I think, and you know, we were talking about this before we came live, like there had been an archivist in there for a good few years trying to catalog things, but you know, there wasn't a massive system in place in most of the archives, although they did have you know, they were starting to go through, so God only knows really, maybe there's not a definitive catalogue printed of their sources, but I think they have a fair idea. And I wanted to know too, do you think Heaney supported abolition?
Yeah, but that's the short answer is we don't know. I'm very keen to see did Heeney support other things like repeal in Ireland and O'Connell. There are references to him being involved.
Because O'Connell would have visited probably.
Yeah, I think so, and it's certainly at the 1830s, early 1840s. He's still very much active. It would be interesting to see did he what involvement he had with these movements.
I loved, Danny, the references to Albany. Our church, of course, St. Anne's or St. Mary's was rebuilt, but the cornerstone of the original one is in church, so it's a beautiful.
The second church at the time,
Imagine, and I think it was 1832, wasn't it? It's super late, it does make you think about when you think of the amount of Irish coming. And I know, as I said, a lot of the earlier ones kind of were Protestant, but it's amazing to think how long it took for a Catholic community to build up. And then, of course, the mushrooms, once they're here.
Yeah, it's certainly the famine just created a huge Catholic, and the churches in New York. You can almost map the churches, the first, the second, the third, the fourth. We're all going on. We're all going north.
German Catholics coming in, Italian Catholics, And, we had it ourselves at home. I say this all the time. Irish people weren't really catechized at home, so it takes the American Irish, to kind of, particularly Hughes was big into that, that you have to be respectable, and we as Catholics have to prove we can be Republican citizens, And wants to know, does the New York Historical Society up there on the west side have anything on Heeney? They have great holdings too, so they easily could have,
We found actually, I've been in there a few times. They've been a great help, I have to say. We found a map. We found a map from 1835. The map was made 6 weeks before the Great Fire, and it actually names, it's an unusual map, it actually named the owners of each property, and Heeney's 2 properties are named on it. And six weeks later, the Great Fire was in New York in December of 1835, and 30% of the known city was burnt, including Heeney's property. So it was really a snapshot of history, because all of those names would have changed again, Yeah, they had it, and it's a huge map. I had to go over there. They couldn't send me it. It was 6 feet long and 4 foot wide. But it's the original. And they had a few other.
They have some of the orphan asylum records, I don't know if it's the same one, but I remember looking, or was it New York Public Library? I was looking at it was like an indentured servant's contract, that they would have on the kids, and because they'd adopt them out to basically to get to learn a trade, which was all maids. I saw the girls one. What was I going to say, Danny or Kieran? When you mentioned there about his political leanings, it's interesting that speech. I can't remember which one of you mentioned it at the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick dinner. So he probably was a bit of a live wire too. He might be keeping in touch.
I think he has sharp edges, all right,
Yeah. And that the Friendly Sons, I know there's papers belong to them in the American Irish too, if we can get back in there.
And, trying to pick up records now of the State Assembly. I would be curious to see, was he vocal? Was he vocal there?
Yeah. And, my God, then, Danny, when you did the who's who of that parish, isn't it amazing? Elizabeth Seton and all these other ones. O'Connor,
it was like going down a rabbit hole, St. Peter's, it's just so many very important people were connected to it. Especially the first 40 or 50 years.
I remember, I don't know, PBS, I think, did it maybe a 7-part series about New York. Like Terry Galway and Peter Quinn, and what's his the man that died last year, he was a newspaper, Pete Hamill, were involved in it, and they talk a lot about the Irish New York of that early kind of 19th century, so there could be some interesting stuff in there too.
Yeah.
But if we have no other questions, guys, I know, Kieran, it's witching hour at home. This was absolutely fascinating. And what's actually so exciting about it kind of is that there is always this new stories to be uncovered. I was saying before I started that, I had initially come to New York thinking I'd write about the Great Hunger era. And I was told it had been done. So, nothing is ever finished, sure, because you're always overturning new stories, and we look at history differently now too, stories that you didn't think you could tell. Maybe you have another way in, so it's amazing to go from, and what drew you just found it was the bell, was it, that brought you first day to this name, or was it from home?
I was from home. I knew the name. We knew the story from around home for many years,
Yeah.
And I'd always said that I wanted to go out to see his grave and I wanted to do something on him on this side.
Yeah.
And to be honest, when COVID hit, as Kieran mentioned earlier, it gave us time, and I started to do all these things, and then one thing led to another, and then, we had great support from the Brooklyn Benevolent Society.
Yeah.
To get their archives was huge, and then going through them just led to Peters and the Bell.
Yeah. And it's the kind of a project that a lot of, you needn't be super religious to get behind it, because he was such a good philanthropist. But, so thanks very much, guys. We'll have to have you back. And if you ever do get the bell out of there, let us know. And we're planning actually on doing a walking tour. And that I used to work for Big Onion walking tours when I lived in New York when I was teaching at Fordham. And that was always, St. Peter's, of course, was always on the Irish tour. The museum is coming up next week next month. We have on the 10th of July, Driocht are over from Ireland. They're Michael Rooney and June McCormack. They'll be with us at about 5 o'clock, I suppose, on that Sunday. And then we have a fantastic talk by Mick Maloney and Lenwood Sloan, or Lenny Sloan, Two Roads Diverged, which again is that history of enslaved Africans and indentured Irish immigrants, and how there sometimes are flashpoints between the two communities, and other times, of course, great collaboration. And then we have Brian Conway performing on the 22nd of July. So we have a lot of music in July, not so much any, aside from the Mick Maloney and Lenny Sloan lecture. We're going to keep it quiet in July and August otherwise, because we have to finish the permanent exhibitions. But guys, Danny and Kieran, thank you. Everyone online here tonight, thank you for joining us. And as I say, we'll be back, and Kieran will be back in the fall, we hope, with some work about the Great Hunger work that he's doing on evictions in Ireland. So you're trapped now, Kieran. It's
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Up the kingdom. We'll just have to put that in.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Take care, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.